Now let's look at two types of errors that we have to calculate when we talk about hypothesis test. So the first type error is rejecting a true hypothesis, H0, the true null hypothesis. So remember the difference between null hypothesis is H0 is the status quo. So something we think is correct and something we trying to disprove by collecting the data. And H1 is, we can call it innovation, right? Innovation or discovery. So if we are to reject the null hypothesis and accept the alternative hypothesis H1, another way to say it is that we made a discovery. So when we accept H1, we made discovery. It means we found out something that was not status quo. We made a claim, we made a statement that goes against status quo, so that's why we call it we made a discovery. Now, type 1 error is to reject a true null hypothesis. When we reject a true null hypothesis, means that we have a false discovery. So we made a claim and we accepted H1 hypothesis, but it's a false thing. So we basically made false discovery. Okay. And not rejecting a false H0 means that we missed a discovery. So there's always a chance that our procedure leads to incorrectly accepting the H1 or incorrectly not rejecting the null hypothesis H0. And so those two types of errors we'll also have to keep in mind. And one of the unfortunate facts about type 1 and type 2 errors is that usually researchers report type 1 error, which is essentially the probability, or essentially they calculate, they use the significance level as probability of rejecting null hypothesis given the null hypothesis is true, which is the probability of type 1 error. But usually people don't talk about the type 2 error, which is not the correct thing to do. So we're going to look at this example. Let's look at an example what happens when we do not report properly type 2 error and how it can lead to misleading results. So let's say we have 1,000 different hypotheses to test. So we have 1,000 tests. Let's say we do a genetic study, or we do a marketing study, and we try to understand what attributes of our marketing campaign affects the outcome, whether people buy the product or not buy the product. And let's say we have 1,000 different attributes of the marketing campaign, and now the hypothesis test for each of the attribute, basically whether this attribute leads to higher sales or does not lead to higher sales. And let's say in reality, which we don't know usually in real life, but let's say the true number is 100. So 100 tests lead to H1 accept. So we basically have to accept the this is H1 alternative hypothesis, or discover. So we do discover in 100 cases. And of course our procedure to perform those tests is noisy. So we do the hypothesis test, and let's say we have 5% false positives, 5% false positive, and we have 20% false negative. So which means that if we perform 1,000 tests, then our procedure will correctly identify it will correctly label 5% of the examples as false positives. So we have 900 negatives and then 5% of this is going to be false positive results, which equals to 45. So 45 cases will be false positives. And also, since we have 20% false negative, we have 80% true positives, means that out of 100 true results, 80 are going to be correctly identified. So 80 are going to be true positives. So we have 80 true positives and 45 false positives. So our testing procedure will result in 125 positive tests. Okay. Now, out of those 125 positive tests, only 80 are actual 80 out of 125 are the true positives. So you see the pictorial here. So out of the true ones, we identified 80%. So that's our 80 true positives. And on top of it, we have 45 which are false positives. And then we have a small fraction of false negatives. So 20 cases were identified as false negatives. So now, when we look at the picture, we say, okay, actually 125 signals were identified by our testing procedure, but of those 125, only 80% are the true signals. So out of this large number, relatively large number, 125 of discoveries that we've made, only 80 of them are true discoveries. And it seems like when you say, oh, I made 120, if you report only type 1 error, you say, okay, I made 125 discoveries, and I'm 5% confident that those discoveries are correct. You're actually hiding the fact by not reporting your type 2 error that out of those 125, only 80 are potentially the true discoveries.